If you were to turn on the television right now and find a live game of European football, no matter where this game is taking place or what level it was, there's a good chance at least one of the teams would look like this. Now, this formation actually goes by many names depending on how you draw the lines, but the core idea remains the same. A build-up of 3 players, 2 defensive midfielders, 2 attacking midfielders, 2 wingers, and a centre forward. And I actually think that as I write this video, this shape could be the most commonly used in all of European football, both domestically and internationally, from Spain to England, Germany to Portugal. The question is, why? And perhaps more importantly, could this be a serious problem? A 3-2-5 shape is far from a new phenomena, and although it has roots in deep football history, its modern uptake can be traced with relative confidence to a certain bold man.
Pep Guardiola is coming!
In fact, Pep Guardiola used a version of it back when he had hair. In Barcelona's famous 5-0 win against Mourinho's Real Madrid, they used a version of this formation in possession. Now, before you come at me with pitchforks, I'm not claiming that Guardiola invented this shape, or that everybody else is copying him. However, Guardiola's success has created a shift towards a certain type of football, a football that happens to be very compatible with this formation, and is based on a fundamental idea. And that idea goes something like this. So Pep says that football is about rationally occupying space and moving the ball to the space. And although this can be interpreted in different ways, the way I think of it is simply occupying as much of the pitch as possible. Apply that to the attacking third, and we end up with this front 5. By consistently occupying these 5 spaces, you can, in theory, access any attacking zone at any given time, be it the wide areas, between the lines, or in behind. And not only does this maximize your attacking options, it also maximizes the space your opponent has to defend. This is especially effective against a back 4. Since you outnumber the back line, you generate what many refer to as a +1. And that is no coincidence. In fact, there are many aspects of this system that are favourable against what is still the most common defensive shape in football, 4-4-2. For example, in build-up, you have 3 players against 2 forwards, often creating space for your wide fullbacks to progress. And as you start to build up, you can use the centre forward to create a 3 versus 2 against the midfielder and centre back, unlocking space between the lines. So simply by occupying specific spaces and then moving the ball to those spaces, you have a potent attacking system in theory. You've got a lot of control in the centre of the pitch, players tend to always have passing options close by, and there's a lot of different ways to attack the opposition backline. However, this shape hasn't just gained popularity for its attacking potential. In fact, the reason a lot of teams have settled on these 2 deeper midfielders, as opposed to 1, is because it creates quite a stable rest defence. That is, your off-ball structure for defending transitions. Teams have found this 3-2 shape very effective in closing space, while covering the flanks with the wide centre-backs. All in all, you can see why so many teams across different countries and levels have found this to be an effective shape for organising their players. However, just because many teams share this structure doesn't mean that they all play the exact same way. In fact, there are many variations in how it's applied that affect the feeling and the rhythm of a team. You wouldn't say that Alonso's Leverkusen and Amorim's Sporting really play anything alike. So where do the differences come from? For one, teams arrive at this shape in many different ways. Some play 3 natural centre-backs and 2 deep midfielders, others push a defender up to become the second pivot, while others push a fullback up to become the winger. It really depends on the players you have in your squad and how they can balance offensive and defensive roles. Regardless, what's much more impactful on how a team actually plays are the nuances within this shape, and every coach and set of players is going to have a slightly different idea. To give you an example, one of the biggest impacts comes from the use of the attacking midfielders. In some teams you'll see them dropping to get on the ball a lot, often in these deeper and wide areas. But in others, you'll see them pretty much glued to the front line, doing most of their running towards goal to stretch the defence. And of course, in most teams, they'll be doing a bit of both. This makes a pretty massive difference to how those teams play, because generally, the more advanced the players are, the quicker you can go from back to front, taking more risks to play the ball into the forwards. But the more they drop in, the more you're likely to see short passes and rotations to cut through the opponent's block rather than over or around it. And there are plenty of other nuances that differentiate teams playing this shape, the height of the wide players, the mobility of the pivots, and so on. However, due to the nature of rationally occupying space, systems like this tend to share similar problems, and those problems are the final things that I want to talk about. The power of this shape comes largely from the strategic positioning of its players, the wide players creating width, the attacking midfielders creating depth, the pivots giving security and build-up, the wide fullbacks making progressive passes. But for this system to function as intended, all of these roles need to be fulfilled at all times, which means it's a shape that can feel quite positionally rigid. Now, of course, that depends on the specific team and players. Some will have more adventurous players that pass and move more, which creates chances to rotate around and fill different roles. But generally speaking, it isn't the most dynamic formation in the world. The position you start in tends to be the position that you play most of the game in. And of course, that isn't always a problem, especially if you're scoring goals, although it can feel at times predictable. The bigger issue though, at least for me, is that you tie players down to pretty specialised roles, and that can feel quite limiting. Wingers typically have to hug the touchline and wait for the ball, often for quite a while before they see it. And those attacking midfielders sometimes get locked out of the game almost completely, which isn't ideal since they're usually the best technicians in the team. All of this is in pursuit of a more functional unit, but sometimes players that could affect the game simply aren't able to do so, although perhaps that is more of a personal gripe than anything. We have seen teams though end up not functioning because they don't have the right quote-unquote profiles in their squad. Maybe a productive winger or a left-footed centre-back who can access those passing lanes, and without those players the shape might not work as intended, and everyone gets frustrated because they think if only we had X or Y kind of player we'd be able to be competitive. And generally speaking, it's that rigidity of idea that is, in my opinion, the main problem with the mass adoption of this shape. Because you end up with coaches trying to fit players into it rather than considering the qualities they have and adapting to that. And the reality is those coaches are going to have a problem once everybody figures this system out, which is already happening of course. Teams defending 4-4-2 are finding ways to mitigate numerical advantages by pressing with specific angles to prevent access to players. And 5 at the back systems are becoming more and more common to cancel out the 5 against 4. So either coaches adapt again, staying ahead of the game by creating new shapes to solve these new problems, no surprise, that's what Pep Guardiola is doing, or they become more sensitive to the players they have and protect themselves from the whims of these tactical trends. Nowadays, when I sit down and see something other than 3-2-5, I find the game much more interesting, and I think I speak for a few people when I say more novelty, especially at the top level, would be a good thing. That's all for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoy these videos, consider supporting the channel over on Patreon, where you'll get access to exclusive bonus podcasts every other week. I expand on the topics in these videos and give you a wider perspective on football tactics. So if that's something that you're looking for, do check that out below. Thanks to all my current members for all your support. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.